Today we have a special episode in honor of Halloween. I first became acquainted with this guest a few years ago when I was working as a local magazine editor. He reached out to me and shared that he was working to uncover facts about an unsolved Mooresville, North Carolina murder from 1937 so we could share the information with our readers. When I found out he was the author of a book about spooky stories of the Piedmont, I wanted to know more. We chatted recently about the still unsolved cold case, the alleged sightings of a mountain lion-like creature in our area, and reports of British Redcoats still marching at night along a main road in Mooresville. He also shared a personal story of his own. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From the murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day. But all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. Episode 70. The oldest unsolved murder in Mooresville, North Carolina, and other spooky tales. A native of Mooresville, North Carolina, O.C. Chris Stonestreet IV has taught history for 30 years at Mooresville Senior High School and is also an adjunct professor of history at Central Piedmont Community College and Wingate University. He worked with St. James Episcopal Church in Shinville, North Carolina, in regards to their 19th century cemetery and delved into the research of the Shinville Witch. He is the author of Curse of the Wampus and Other Short Spooky Stories of Piedmont, North Carolina, and The Battle of Cowan's Ford, General Davidson's Stand on the Catawba River, and its place in North Carolina history. Today, we would like to welcome Chris Stonestreet to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today, Chris.
Honored to be here.
So you and I first became acquainted when you shared the story of a 1937 unsolved murder that took place in Mooresville. Could you share more about 20-year-old Lue Cree Overcash Westmoreland and the circumstances behind her death with our listeners?
Yes. This is in 1937, January. Lue Cree was a recent graduate, just 20 years old. She had just gotten married to Herman Westmoreland, who worked here in the mill section. And on a January night, dark and stormy night, quite literally very cold, she goes missing. And the next morning, certain things happen. And the big question is what happened? The case is strange. It's sort of like, I guess you might say, Arlo County's versions of the biggest clue case there is, in my view.
So where was her body discovered again?
Okay, what happened was, well, let me give sort of the time frame here. Her husband, Herman, worked in town, and they actually lived outside of town towards Shinville, which is just outside of Mooresville. And we're still with sort of the township area. And what happened is she married Herman just months before, like I said, and she was actually living with Herman's father and younger brother, who was 17. They had also two siblings that were young girls, I believe 7 and 9. And she was brought in ostensibly to help take care of the girls. The mother had died just a few years before. I think it was cancer. I'd have to double check. And Herman would come here and work during the week and would go home on the weekends, usually, or during the week, but he'd stay here in town. They had sort of like a room that they could stay in. And the night that he was, that this happened, it was a very bad rainy night, stormy, and he stayed. And of course, back then you had T models and A models that couldn't, a lot of the roads around here were not paved. A lot of people, forget that we had the luxury of paved roads, and there were very few paved roads at the time. And the next morning, the father and the two daughters, and this is the strange part, the timeline on this is what those of us that looked at this case are looking at. The father and the two daughters ended up at Lue Cree's mother and father's house rather early, like 7. And they're like, we can't find her. Her bed has not been slept in. We're worried about her. And what happens is there's a search, and a good friend of mine, Jeff Wright, who teaches with me, his great grandfather, John Robert Lee McNeely, suggested looking in the well. And most properties here had wells. And strangely enough, years before, not that many years before, a murder happened, and there's no mystery. We know what happened with this murder, but the murder threw the body of this guy down a well, and he said, have you checked the well, which is 50 feet from the house on the property? And sure enough, they had one of the workers there on the farm, this is a farm area, said that the animals weren't drinking the water. So they lower I can't imagine the horror this will be. They lower this little boy down the well holding onto a rope, and he screams, and they see the 1 foot sticking up, and of course they bring him up. They go down and bring the body up. So she was discovered in the well probably about 3 or 4 hours after that she was reported that morning missing. So and the position of the body was strange. The fact that she was dressed in silk pajamas. She had patent leather shoes, nice shoes. One was off. It looked like, put it this way, it looked like someone had dressed her. And the fact that there was when they did the coroner's commission later, they didn't find any water in the lungs, but they did find an impression on the back of her skull in the shape of a blunt force trauma of a triangle. And that's the position of the body at the time when they pulled it out. And, like I said, it's just, okay, A, it wasn't a suicide. We knew that for a fact. And B, what's strange is the 2 young daughters that she was taking care of were sleeping downstairs in the kitchen. And to get outside, she would have had to go through the kitchen. So what's going on here? There were tracks. They did find tracks where she had stood for a while, like under the awning of the where her window was, but then ran off. Like you can see the tracks sort of getting wider from what the report said, but there were no secondary tracks. So it's crazy. The dogs there did not bark. So if someone was coming to the property, they would bark. So yeah.
And what have the theories been on this case over the years that you've heard?
Well, the theory is this. Well, Herman, her husband, had an airtight alibi. He was in town. People saw him. He was there. I think in the boarding place they had, there were people that were, there with him. But the theories is the fact that probably circles down to 2 people. One is the father, who, like I said, he was still in his late 40s. Here's a 21-year-old beautiful young woman taking care of your kids. The mother's been dead for 4 or 5 years. And one theory is that he made a move on her, and she said no, and a scuffle ensued, crime of passion, and he pushed her or shoved her, or with the triangle shape in the back of the head. And this is just me. I'm just putting my own 2 cents in. Do you remember the old-timey irons that were made of iron? They used to sit on like the hearth. When I heard that description, my mind went right to that. Turned around, how dare you? I'll tell your son smack. But here's the thing. They had, when he was dying, they had a 24-hour watch around his bed, hoping to get a deathbed confession. And he said to the moment he died, he did not do it. But a lot of the people in the Overcash family, I believe, still believe it was a father. But the younger son has become under suspect recently because he was 17, rather stockily built, certainly was probably closer in age to her than his father. And I interviewed one of the relatives, and like I said, I've been interviewing people over the years on this, and she said, I'll keep her name off the air, but she said she was told by her family, do not go near the younger brother, who was named Robert Clyde. Now, both Herman and Clyde served honorably in World War II. I'm not trying to besmirch their name or anything, but these are just theories that have been put forth. And that's where, like I said, I've been looking at more, because I've had more than one person said that the younger brother, wasn't, how should I say this? He was a little bit of an odd character. That might have been just his personality, maybe reclusive. But, I think it's between those two men, because if there's anyone, off of the area, that it was a fairly desolate area. Everyone knew everyone. That someone that was coming out of town probably would have been seen this situation. And there again, if the brother had done it by accident, it could have been an accident. I've heard different tales. People had said within the family, the Westmoreland family, that a couple of guys were rounders and were drunk, came back. She came out to say, "Get quiet." They pushed her, and she hit her head on the well. Like, oh, what do we do? So there's all these different theories, but like I said, that's been focused on those two. And the father could have died saying it was not me, and been trying to cover for his son. And that's just a theory that those of us know the case have. It's one of those two we're thinking.
And what is the poem that was found a couple of years ago about this?
Yes, boy, this is interesting. Okay, I've got to tell you, you're speaking of spooky and interesting. My good friend Jeff Wright, like I said, has a connection with the case through his ancestry. My fifth grade teacher, Mary Lois Cook, who taught at Brawley for like 50 years, her father was on the coroner's commission that saw the body. Back in the past, you had a group of men that came in to watch a coroner do the work and say, here's evidence. Now we record it in digital, whatever, I guess. But there's so much connection with people that have been here for many, many years. But what happened was, after I did the article, about every 2 years, I've gotten an email or someone will call up and say, my grandfather told me this, or my grandmother, or my friends. It's almost every 2 years that something comes along. And then a couple of years ago, there's a poem that was found in a cedar chest by a relative, a Westmoreland relative. And in there, it's a poem. It's a cry from the grave. And this poem is, in fact, if you'd like me to read it now, I'm going to exit here a second, and I'm going to see you disappeared again. Oh, there you are. Okay, good. Okay. If you'd like me to read it, I will read it.
Oh, yes, of course.
And by the way, Lue Cree's own senior poem has been found. They asked seniors back in the past to write something. I've got that. But here's what was found in the cedar chest. It says, a voice from the grave. It said, rise up, good people, in your might. Ask your sheriff by what right he seeks to run again, was foully murdered and thrown on well to die. Did I die in vain? O knights of Pythias and lions bold, O worthy masons of Kiwanis too, from my tomb I appeal to you. On your country is a stain, because it seems I died in vain. I wonder why no arrest was made. Was your good sheriff so afraid? Is his backbone of the hue applied to jealousy and cowardice too? O men, hang not your heads in shame. Rise up, make your country worth its name, that you may speak with it of pride. Valiant lines no criminal shall hide. I cannot rest, though in my grave, while in your midst there hides a knave, waiting perhaps to bad and to slaughter someone else's only daughter. Though I am dead, my spirit soars. It sees mockery of your laws. It hears more will run again. It waits here, you say, she did not die in vain, lest we forget. And there's the poem that was found in a cedar chest a couple of years ago, out of the blue. And I guess, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that's pretty descriptive.
Wasn't it? And see, there again, the sheriff's time was more, and the implication is there was things that were known or implied that were known. And I guess what gets me is I'm a Mason. So when she says, speak up, I had a friend of mine who claims to be a little bit of a medium said, well, she's asking you to solve it. I'm like, yeah, I dare say whoever was really guilty has probably been dealt their own punishment by this time. Because only people that are left alive are in their 80s or 90s that were kids at the time. And I've interviewed a few of them too. They all of the people of this area when this happened have their own views and heard the story and campfire. It's great who's done it, and it's just one of those mysteries I don't think will ever fully be solved. Unless someone finds in another cedar chest a written confession, left to posterity like I did it, or I don't think we'll ever fully know.
Right, because there weren't even at that point in time, there weren't even crime scene photos or anything like that. I'm imagining.
Probably not in this area. Probably in the big cities like New York, Chicago, maybe Charlotte. And here's the thing too, this didn't happen around here. We can count on your hand probably the murders that were done in 50 years in this area. People got along. People were related. Yeah, I'm related to families that are connected to this, not directly but indirectly. I tell my kids when I teach that I actually dated a cousin one time, and the reason is when you have the same 30 families for 200 years, same location. Now we are sort of inundated with people coming from outside the area, but when you have a small group, located in a small area, everyone knows everybody, and everyone's sort of related. And this is something of the old South, and also I think some parts of the Midwest in our own country that this is just normal at the time. So, and that's what makes it worse is the fact that this is something that was a besmirch to the community when just the loss on two families. I mean, Herman, I believe, remarried, but you can never get over that. And I feel bad for the Westmorelands, and I feel horrible for the Overcashes that this happened, and the families are still in the area, and it's still being debated to this day.
Right. And that was Herman's family.
Yeah. This is
family that was involved, possibly. So what was he supposed to do?
Newlyweds, and the magic was still there, I'm sure. And I can't imagine that type of loss at such a young age, and then go right into World War II not many years later. So it's rough. It was a tough life.
Well, thank you for sharing that case with us. That really is a fascinating case, and like you said, it's probably one that likely won't be solved because there's just been too much time passed, and unless somebody has hidden a deathbed confession somewhere in a journal, we're not ever really going to be able to find that out.
I will throw one thing else in though. The SBI got involved.
Oh, really?
And strange thing is, from one report, they actually exhumed the body after burial and supposedly amputated a foot, because the reason is there's some stuff on that non-shoed foot that didn't look right for the area, like it was different type of dirt that maybe should have been killed somewhere and brought back home. We're not sure. And where are those records? I've been still trying to track that down. And I've always said it would be interesting, if the families would not mind, is if you took the case evidence we have and the reports that we have, the interviews that we have, what if at some point in time we would do like a SBI, local sheriff's office, Mooresville police, whatever, say, how would you approach this case now compared to 85 years ago, what have you? How would the approach be? Of course, now you have DNA analysis and stuff they just did not have. But it's a interesting case that, like I said, to me, it's the oddest case I've run into in the Mooresville Township area, for sure.
It's nothing like an interesting cold case, right?
Right, that's right.
So there are a few stories you shared in your book, Curse of the Wampus and Other Short Spooky Stories of Piedmont, that I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
One is this mountain lion-like creature that was known to kill large masses of livestock and the bulldogs that were supposed to guard them. Can you tell us more about this?
Wow. Well, that's one of the great ones of the area. The Wampus, and doesn't that sound so So us, it's named something called a wampus. Also known as the Santer, Santer, was supposed to be a mythological creature. Now, here's when I'll take you back in time. Supposedly, it goes back to Cherokee folklore. Supposedly, a young woman, which put on the pelt of a mountain lion, was trying to sneak in, sort of camouflage like, to watch a ritual done by the elders. I think it was a ritual rite of passing for men or whatever. She wasn't supposed to be there. Well, the elders caught her and said, since you have been stealthy like a cat, you shall be one for all eternity. And she morphed with the pelt and became what became the wampus. That's a sort of the quote unquote Native American take that this is a shapeshifter. Different people have said that it's a shapeshifter. Others said it's a type of mountain lion whose cries like that of a wailing woman and an angry beast. That was one line. But this supposed creature has been seen from the Carolinas down to Georgia. People that are out in the woods a lot, people that have no bear when they see a bear, they know mountain lions when they see it. And some people swear this is not it. Besides some of the more extreme descriptions of it, they say it's smaller than a mountain lion, but larger than like a lynx. And it attacks at night, kills livestock, but also, as you mentioned, in 1931 in Shinville, right down the road, there again, everything's around this area here, right? Watch out. But supposedly this farmer reported having purchased 2 bulldogs weighing about 120 pounds each. So those serious dogs were torn up like rags by something, and heard strange hollers and screams and all that. Occasionally, you'll hear reports, in fact, and down to, I believe it was northern Georgia, that they actually established in 1 or 2 towns like a curfew, because this supposedly came during the certain times of the year, and they weren't sure what it was. Posses have been sent out to try to track this thing down. They can't do it, or the dogs were killed trying to track it. So we're not sure. I have a theory, though, and if you want to hear my theory.
Of course.
Okay. Well, my theory is well, with every folklore, okay, with like the murder case, you have a body. Okay, we get that. We'll never know what happened, but there you go. But with every legend and folklore, there's usually a kernel of truth. Okay. I believe that the wampus may be a known thing. And what I think it is something that very few people in this area have heard about. But I think at one time it had a greater range than it does now. And there's a creature called a jaguarundi. It's like a mini jaguar. Okay. They're relegated to the border between Mexico and Texas. However, a couple of years ago in Florida on a golf course, a couple were seen. So you're talking about going from Texas to Florida, it's a pretty good stretch. Okay. People have coyotes around here. They say all over the place. I've only seen 2 in 20 years. And those were flashes. Okay. And those were more numerous. So imagine a creature that is way more stealthy than a coyote. Blackish brown. I mean, if it was in a corner, you probably wouldn't even see it. Something that, would totally be a night stalker. That creature could easily kill a dog. You think about a small, slightly miniature mountain lion. And I believe that the jaguarundis probably had a greater range than we knew in the past. They may have been now shrunk, but that's my personal theory. I said, is there a creature? What you do is there a creature that exists that compares with the majority of the, let's say, more generalized descriptions, and this creature fits it. And if you hear the howl, maybe on Google for your listeners, you can find a little video clip of a howl of one. It sounds really different. It's certainly, I think, it would not sound like anything you've heard in the American South. So that's my theory. Some people have said sometimes, though, that the newspaper, knowing that this is a hot topic, would occasionally run out to get more newspaper sales. And then some people said during certain times of, and this is sort of shameful, but this is history, that certain times that when there were protests for equal rights or or with people trying to meet to discuss about changing certain social strata, that occasionally the paper would run these things, knowing that this would make people scared to go out at night, things like that. So I think it's been used for different things over time. But I do know for a fact that my great uncle, who'd been living on the lake all his life, was putting on a roof back around 2002 or 3, and he and the workers saw something cross a cove and go on the bank, and they said, we didn't know what it was. And the description he gave matched what the other descriptions were. He said, it's not a bear, it's not lynx, it's not but this thing was large and black and had claws, and the eyes flashed and went into the woods. And he said, they all stopped work and said, did you see that? So there you go. Is the wampus still among us? Maybe.
Was it in the water at all?
So he said it had crossed a little bit of the cove. Yeah. And see, and there again, you go, well, if that was a cat, would really cats do that? But
right.
There, I don't know. There again, it's what if.
That's interesting. It kind of brings up the reason why I asked you about the water is the whole Nessie, or not Nessie. What do they call it? Normie? The Lake Norman creature that people have seen.
Yeah,
which is probably just a large catfish. I don't know. I've
probably
heard a lot of theories about that.
Here's the problem with that. Okay, Lake Norman is not connected to the ocean. Most of the sightings, like with Nessie and Loch Ness, and with Ogopogo up north, in the Canadian area, they have connections to the sea. And I still personally, this is just me personally, I believe there's some things we do not know about. I like to think we don't know everything, and I don't believe we do. But if there's something that resembles like a plesiosaur or whatever, and it just comes into for a couple of weeks for, I don't know, having babies and going back out to sea, you need to have a connection with the sea. I think if there's something in Lake Norman other than a large catfish or something like that, I think someone would have, it's a man-made lake essentially. And yeah, but who knows? People see things and you can't explain it. And like I said, what did my uncle see? What the wampus? We'll never know. So.
But they all saw it, so it was something.
Something. The question is what?
Right. So what about, I had never heard reports that people have seen ghosts of British Redcoats marching at night along Langtree Road.
Okay, well, I know about that one because that's really my focus. I'm a teacher, high school teacher by day, but an adjunct professor by night. And the Battle of Collins Ford is sort of my forte. And in 1881, the British did what was called the Southern Campaign. They came through Charleston and moved north under Lord Charles Cornwallis. And General Davidson, which Davidson College is named after, led a group of about 800 or so odd patriots trying to slow down the British. This is about the time that Daniel Morgan changed off commands with a guy by the name of Greene. You may have heard Greensboro. It's Nathaniel Greene. And what happened was the British were camped near Ramsar's Mill and got word that the Americans, well, this is going into, like December to January the next year, half of the men that were in the Patriot Army here were only enlisted for a year. They had like a yearly enlistment, and many were coming back, but they want to go home, check on the family, how's the farm, So if you're the British commander and you hear up the road less than a couple hours march that you have a change of command with someone from the north that doesn't know the area, and you hear that probably half of the force that might face you is leaving for a time, what better time to attack? And it's winter when traditionally the British didn't go on the attack. And Cornwallis, showing the tactical skill, said, we're going. He burned some of his baggage. He told his men, we're going to get them before they get across to the dam. And he leads an attack. The thing is that he was spotted by spies, and reports got back to Davidson, says, hey, they're coming. And Davidson had actually met with Greene and Morgan and William Washington, a cousin of George, on the banks of the Catawba River. and they were discussing about, okay, he can cross at either Cowan's Ford, Beatty's Ford, which is where they were talking. The lake wasn't there yet. Tools Ford or Tuckasegee, and as they're talking, a redcoat showed up across the river. And Davison's like, oh my gosh, get the army, get to Salisbury, and then get up to Guilford Courthouse, which is another major battle in the Southern campaign, and says, get out of here. I'll hold them off as long as I can. So Davison set up 2 lines of defense like speed bumps to slow the British down. And what people don't realize too in this area is that one reason the British came down here was to gain men. There were a lot of loyalists in the South that were not affected by the Sugar Act. Or, the Patriot stuff really was focused around Boston and New York. So people forget that there was an entire legion of cavalry called the American Legion, led by a guy named Tarleton. And this is brother against brother stuff. Kings Mountain, people think, oh, the British were there. There's only one British soldier at Kings Mountain, and that was Major Patrick Ferguson. Everyone else was born American. They were deciding which side to be on. And what happened was Davison is the British cross at night, led by a traitor, I might add, a loyalist. And Davison is killed, and the men retreat from the river back to the rally point, which is Torrance's Tavern. Now that is off near, not on exactly, but near where Langtree Road is, that off ramp area. And for now, here's where this my one little pat on the back here is the fact that those of us that were locals were told pretty much this, that the fight at the river was tough. Some of the Davison's killed. Some of the guys got back to the tavern, were having a drink to calm their nerves, and the British suddenly show up. Okay, that came from General Graham's account of the battle, but he wasn't even there. So let me ask you this: if I said, "Hey, some guys showed up and had a drink, and the British show up, a few guys, what number do you think?" When I say a few guys got back from the fight,
10 maybe.
Okay, yeah, you're talking about like a handful, right? Well, what I found out is the fact that it was several hundred people were involved in this fight. And what I came down to is when I was searching the pension records, is that in the 1820s and 30s, the United States government gave a pension to those survivors of the war. That showed where you were and what you did, and have background to get your pension. Like, yes, I served. What I did was I mistyped the word Torrance. I put Terrence or Torrance, not Torrenc like we spell it now. I spelled different ways. Guess what? Instead of getting 40 hits, I got several hundred. And it came down to the fact we didn't have standardized education. And this fight ended up being where, when the British got there, they debated attacking because Davison left his second line of defense. In fact, even guys from South Carolina had come up to help defend, and the British launched this massive attack down that road. And it was a fight that went from, like you said, what you think of, you've just been told through oral history, a handful of guys, and they burned the tavern. It turned out to be, I estimate, about 700 people get into a fight. Wow. Now, that is a battle, especially for that era. And the British do bust through. They lose 28 horses on the attack. They were shot out, and the British come close to. In fact, what's interesting is after they broke through the defenses at the tavern, they did send some elements on up the road towards Salisbury, and they did fight some guys, a little skirmish fighting, and they thought it was guys from the tavern that got back. What they did was they got to the back end of the Patriot Army that was retreating. They were that close. If we had proper uniforms or flags, they would have known something was up, and we came that close to losing. And Davison died, doing his job, slowing them down, and just nothing. When Cornwallis got there, with the last groups coming over, he said, burn the tavern, which may be on the edge of what is now Lowe's headquarters property. We're not sure. I have my theory about where it is. And of course, Lowe's doesn't want us scouting for stuff on the property, which I fully respect. But I believe that the fight happened just off of their property because I know the road was shifted a couple of about 100 yards in the 1830s because of drainage. But for years, okay, going back to your paranormal stuff, but for years, people down that road had passed on that certain times of the year, this was in February, it was a nasty night, that they would hear, what sounded like troops moving up the road. I was given a talk and this is eerie to me, I was given a talk at one of the DAR meetings. And one of the ladies, this nice old lady, came up and said, my grandmother said that she saw the Redcoats and ghost form going up the road and all this. And here I am trying to shake hands and sell a book or two. And when I turned around, she was gone. It's like I looked all over the room for her because I want to get the story, for my own personal. And it's like she just vanished. And I was like, okay, that's scary.
That's interesting.
So, but yeah, and I do have one or two like where a couple of guys got in hand-to-hand fights with these guys. And these were Americans that sided with the king, not the Patriot cause. And supposedly one of them is buried, I might add, out in the woods near Langtree. We'll never know. So maybe it's this loyalist soldier that's been condemned for not joining the proper side. That's now courtesy of the development of the area.
Could be.
Langtree. So there you go.
Interesting. Well, I wanted to mention this. I just thought of this. Years ago, I was on a message board. It was a message board for moms, and I had joined it when my kids were infants. But for some reason, and you don't know who the people are that are on there because everybody has
Right.
usernames and everything, but someone mentioned that she lived out, where Hager's Ferry is?
Okay, yeah, roughly, yes.
Towards Denver.
Yeah.
So you go past 73 towards Denver. And she lived in a neighborhood out there. And she mentioned that one night she couldn't sleep and she was in her kitchen and she looked out her kitchen window and she saw like an apparition in her yard of a woman that looked like she was gardening. So she was in like pioneer style clothing and she
or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought that was so interesting because when you think about what that area was like for so many years, it was farmland and.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I don't think we know the whole thing. I do know that they've tried to apply science to some of this. They said that like granite retains energy and things like that, we're seeing like if you ran a copy off on a copier, that something was there is not. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Here's the thing that I keep coming back to. Energy can never be destroyed. It can only be transformed. So who's to say that, after this life, regardless of religious views or background, that maybe certain things leave an imprint, and especially I think when you're talking about like the soldiers, this is a violent use. Those guys that marched up that road had just seen people they knew were killed. Or they had killed. And, they're deep in a country that's not, it's not England or Scotland anymore. They're deep in the colonies and, they had a win or two, but everywhere they go through Charlotte, they got stung like hornets, as the phrase went, when they went out, and you're having to, and they just on their tippy toes got across the Catawba in freezing water, so I think if there was something to this energy theory that, certainly that would leave an imprint, if this is something that's in your life, that's a defining moment, especially in your 20s, teens, late teens or 20s, who's to say, and, but of course too, as far as stories go around Halloween is, sometimes just to keep the kids inside at night. You can use a little bit of history to your advantage, like the boogeymen. There were boogeymen, but they're called Borghese men off the coast of Malaysia. And that word got corrupted over time. So I tell the kids about that there are boogeymen. They're like, whoa, so there you go.
Yeah, I think it was last year I was researching haunted colleges and universities, and I came across statements by people at colleges, professors and things like that, that said a lot of these like legends and folklore about these hauntings at colleges, they're not meant to be scary. They're meant to sort of welcome the incoming students into their new environment and give them a sense of attachment to where they live. Because not all of them, a lot of them are very similar. It's, a student died and now you see her walking around campus and things like that. But they're not always meant to be scary. I mean, there are some scary ones out there.
Right.
But I thought it was interesting the way those have evolved over time. And that if you look at a lot of them, you can see a pattern where legends all have a similar, they're very similar.
Yeah.
In what they're saying.
I actually investigated a classic that back in the 1960s, there was a husband and wife team called Roberts, Nancy Roberts. And I can't remember her husband's name. I think it's Larry. But they put out a series of books called, like Haunted Carolinas. And there was like 3 or 4 of them. And I think she did the writing and he did the photography. But he did the fancy double exposure. And, as kids, this is for internet and gaming and all this other stuff. These are fascinating to read. And there's one in there that I remember called The Girl at the Underpass in what is now Jamestown, North Carolina. So a couple of years ago, I'm going to track that thing down. And sure enough, this is the cover of my book is on there, I went to Jamestown and you go to the archives and there again, you try to make good friends with your librarians and archivists so they can help you out. And I said, I'm just curious. And oh yeah, there's the case. And, and I think that you talked about how things get tweaked as the tale goes on. That's just coming back from the prom and got in a fight with her boyfriend. Turned out there was a lady named Lydia, and she was coming back from a New Year's Eve party in 1924, ran her T model into the side of the overpass and died. Well, there weren't many deaths related to vehicles and alcohol in the 1920s in this area, so that surely would been big. But here's the thing, there was a real girl and there was a car wreck and she did die in it, and the family's still in the area, so they didn't want me to I respect that. But what's interesting is that over the last 80 years, or now going on close to 100, is that the number of these people that have picked up a lady supposedly in that area and drove her home, and when they got out of the car, she's gone. These have been firemen, these have been police, these have been lawyers, have been college students, have been, and you say they're seeing something where, these are people, most of them don't even know the story at all, not even, have out of towners, this lady in distress. And what's interesting is that the overpass moved. The original overpass is now about 100 yards deep into the, kudzu, and was even spookier. And that's why I got that still shot from my book. A friend of mine was able to dress up as in a dress. We got Goodwill and, wave, and that's the shot on the book, which is, and I'll be honest with you, her name's Desi. She's a cousin of mine. And when she was getting dressed to do the picture, I actually went up over the overpass and went, yeah, like that. She about didn't do the picture. So over on that one, over some Bojangles, I think. But, it was one of those things where, just sometimes the numbers do not add up to, you can explain away just as a something to scare the kids. There's something to some of these. What they're seeing, we don't know. Is there something beyond? I think so. But I don't think we can scientifically explain all of it. And like I said, it's interesting to think, is there stuff out there that we can't really get a grasp on?
It's true. When I was visiting my daughter, she goes to the University of Alabama, and there is allegedly a ghost in their library, the main library. And she was, I think, maybe the president's wife at some point, like one of the founding president. And there is a floor on the university that the elevator is not supposed to stop at because it's where the archives are. And if you see the elevator stop there, then supposedly she has gotten off it and is walking around. And we went to visit her, and we were waiting on the elevator, and my daughter said, "Look, it stopped on that floor."
Oh my gosh. Well, that'd be interesting. The ghost be like, do you know your Dewey Decimal System? Things like that. Well, I'll tell you one real quick that I heard from a good friend of mine. The supposedly most haunted place in America is like Gettysburg.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the Gettysburg College was there during the war, and that some of the buildings there were used as makeshift hospitals. 3-day battle. They estimate probably 40,000 amputations. I mean, it was a horrible fight. But I do know from a friend of mine that went there, they heard from one of the guys there, the security guard, that said that these two young ladies, undergrads, were there in the library, and they had hit the button to go down. Speaking of elevators, what reminded me of it. It said that they went past the first floor, went to the basement area, and with the door open, they were right in the middle of the Civil War. Said there were soldiers laying around, and people saying, "Come help this man. Put your hand here, stop the bleeding, and come on." And these figures were motioning them to come help, like nurses. And they closed the door button, went back up, and went screaming out of, the college and calling security. And they went down and looked, everything was okay, but they weren't about to go back in the, and he said that there's no question they were not faking this. They were terrified out of their mind, what they saw. So who knows, but it's interesting how many are around like college libraries. But hey, if you're cursed, might as well catch up on your reading.
Yeah.
What you going to do? Yeah.
That's true. It's as good a place as any to be stuck forever, right?
No late
fee. Are there any other spooky stories or legends you wanted to share with our listeners?
Well, can I tell you a real quick personal one?
Sure.
If you can include it. And I hope I'm not boring your listeners. But I teach at Mooresville High School. Okay. And this is nothing bad. But we redid a lot of the school. The school's very beautiful. We got a performing arts center. But one of the buildings that was torn down, so I can mention this, was the old Roland R. Morgan Auditorium. It was built back during the, I think, late 50s, early 60s, and it was here through when I was in school. Well, here's a personal story about a ghost story, but has I think a nice ending. So I grew up. My grandparents were in World War II, and my grandfather, Stonestreet, played the trumpet. He was in Mooresville High School's first band. And then when we went to the service, occasionally he would play like taps or reveille and stuff like that. He was sort of like a surrogate trumpeter. Well, I grew up listening to big band music and things like that. And in 1982, though I was a freshman, you were in high school at the time, the high school band, and I played trombone. My father played trumpet in the Navy band during the Vietnam era. So we're a bunch of musicians. And our director at the time, Dr. Bruce Bulls, said, "Hey, I would like to make a sort of a jazz band, like play some bebop and, some 30s and 40s, big band music." And I'm like, and it's fun to play. If you ever play a musical instrument, big band is fun to play. It's real easy and it's fun. So, of course, I'm like, oh, I got to get into that. So we formed the band, the jazz band. Well, December 16th, see, notice how this stuck in my mind. I know the dates. 1982 was the band concert where they have everyone from fifth grade playing their kazoos up through the high school band. And then we were the last show. So I told my granddad all that week, I said, "You got to come hear us. We're playing, Benny Goodman, stuff that you like. And, I'll come, I'll come hear you." So we play that night. And of course, house lights aren't on yet. So we play through it and we rock it and, just have a great time. And when the house lights come on, I go out to the seating area and I found my family. Everyone's there except my granddad. And I asked my grandma, I said, "Where's Granddad?" And she said, "Well, he wasn't feeling well today. He put his jacket and hat on and got to the car and said, I just don't feel well. I'll tell Chris I'll hear him some other time." So I asked my mom, I know at least 3 times, "Let me go by and talk to my granddad. I want to tell him about the concert." "Well, tomorrow's your last day at school. You'll see him over Christmas break." Well, we go home that next day, go to school, and about 9:30 or something like that. And I get the call to the office. Will you please send Chris Stonestreet up with his bags to the main office? And everyone's like, ooh, and I'm like, what the heck? So I get up there, and I'm like, and my mom just comes out and says, look, you're old enough, so I'm going to tell you your grandfather passed away this morning. And I thought she was doing a bad joke. I'm like, you're just getting me out of school. We're going to get some Mickey D's and go shopping. Well, we went to the house, and sure enough, he had died. In fact, there was still some the medical stuff, when they come in and try to, stuff. And needless to say, it was a horrible Christmas. My dad, I think, blacked that out in his mind, just that Christmas. Well, here's the thing. The next month, right before school started, we were going to go play somewhere. I think at a local nursing home. They were like, would you come play for us? So Mr. Boyle said, why don't we, because the band stuff was still set in the band pit that like the night we played, it was just left up there. And we'll go through the whole thing. And if there's a piece we need to work on, we'll work on it. So we go up there and warm up. About the time we're warming up, the door to the balcony opens. And in walks this somewhat heavy-set man wearing a red jacket and a British racing cap, the ones that sort of point. And my friend, Chris, goes, is that your dad? And my dad had come in and sat in and played with us because we played trumpet, just keep his chops loose. And I looked, and I said, I think it is. And I waved, and this figure waved. My friend Chris waved. And we played through the whole set like we did the night before. And this figure got up, waved again, and I waved, and went out the door. And about the time the door shut, this is two big flights of steps. My dad walks in. Like the door went shut, and Dad walks in. And everyone was like, how the hell did he get down here so fast? He didn't have a jacket or hat. And, like I think it wouldn't even mean, my friend Chris goes, how did you get down here so fast from up there? And he said, what do you mean? He says, I was out on the landing or the door entrance talking to one of the other school officials about doing some band booster stuff. And we were like, well, who came out of the door? Because you could see right up. If someone came out, you would see them. I didn't see anyone come out of the door. Here's the kicker. About a week later, my grandmother's going through my granddad's stuff. You might want to keep this. We're going to take this to Christian Mission or Goodwill. And she throws down on the bed the red jacket and the ball cap. She says, take this, your dad. It's brand new. I got it for Granddad. And I said, looked at her and said, was he wearing that the night he was going to come to the concert? She went, how'd you know that? So I like to think Granddad got to hear it. And when I told my friends in the band, they all went, oh my gosh. So
right,
I don't
I
don't think it's a bad ghost story.
No.
But I like to think Granddad got to hear the concert after all.
Sounds like he did.
So there you go.
I think that's a great story. I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to share these stories with our listeners. And I know they're really going to enjoy this.
Well, I appreciate it. And I wish everyone a happy and safe Halloween season.
Thank you.
This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. We'd like to thank Chris Stonestreet once again for taking the time out to be interviewed for the show. I put the links to his books in the show notes so you can check them out. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd also like to support the show in a small way, you can buy me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com, Renee Robertson. Thank you so much for those who have already supported me through this platform. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. Sound editing is provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.